Welcome everyone, VMworld Barcelona 2012. Our last tech talk of the day, and we have the one, the only, Mike Laverick. Now, yeah, applause for Mike. So, Mike, if I understand correctly, you're going to talk to us about the software-defined data center.
I am indeed.
All right, so we had a little slow start. You don't know this at home, but I'm going to go ahead and let you get to it so that we can kind of wrap when we need to.
Cool, thank you very much.
Mike, thanks for coming.
Thank you. All right, just to make it clear, although I now work for VMware, none of the slides I'm going to talk about or talk you through come from VMware at all, so this is like stuff I've put together. And basically what I want to do is sort of explain what I think this software-defined data center thing is about, so it's very much my perspective, if you like, on the thing. Before I get started, I want to sort of explain the two graphics I've got on the PowerPoint. I've got on one side an empty rack with nothing in it, and then on the opposite side I've got a big pallet that's like full of what looks to be HP DL 380s or 385s. And it's a bit of a gag really, because I wrote a blog post about what the software-defined data center was, and I used the graphic on the right as a kind of joke, because I think there are some people out there who mistakenly think that a software-defined data center means you have no hardware. Yeah. that you just have like an empty server room with tumbleweed going through it. That's not what I think the software-defined data center is about, neither do I think VMware thinks that. In fact, the way we're going to get to this software-defined data center is by working very closely with hardware partners. Because at the end of the day, you still need storage, you still need networking, and you still need a server to get ESX on. And the kind of backstory behind the pallets, it's kind of, if you like, my feeling about where virtualization is taking us. So a little bit of an anecdote, if you like. Back in 2003, 2004, when I first downloaded VMware's ESX2, I tried to install it to a PC and was shocked to discover that my Dell Optiplex PC wasn't really a very good candidate for the ESX software because it was IDE based, probably didn't have enough memory to even load the kernel. So I went on eBay, who is my OEM of choice, you know, I can't afford brand new equipment, looking for a server. That was on the HCL. You know what, I couldn't find one. Yeah, it took me about 3 or 4 months until a couple of servers came up, Dell 1750s, 1U pizza boxes that were out right at the bottom of the HCL, just about supported, and that's where I started learning VMware. But now, if you go on eBay and you search for HP server, what you will see is pictures like this, pallets worth of hardware that nobody really wants anymore. And I've said to people in the community and at VMware, do you not think this is a kind of unscientific, quantifiable measure of the effect of virtualization? That people don't want this sort of stuff anymore. They want blades, or they want big boxes that can take an awful lot of memory. The kind of thing that used to have an operating system installed to it and the apps installed to it, nobody wants anymore. I think this is great for the VMware community because it means anybody wanting to set up a home lab now has more choices available than they did when I first started. But I guess the two for me sort of fit together. Virtualization was meant to reduce the number of hosts you had, server consolidation, and if you like, pallets worth of hardware now available on eBay is for me a tangible example of that becoming true. So it's a kind of scene setter for where we're coming from, if you like. If you want to learn more about my ideas and my thoughts, I've got a blog post all about the software-defined data center. I've even narrated it into a podcast because it kind of suited that. And if you want to subscribe to the podcast, these are the URLs you will need. And guys, if you want these PowerPoints to put them on site, just ask me for them, yeah? So I'm going to talk about the software-defined data center, what it means to me. I won't bore you with a full list of the agenda because you're going to see it anyway. So first one, the virtual data center. And again, it's a bit of an anecdote, this as well. When I was an instructor back in 2003, 2004, this PowerPoint is from the very early courseware from VMware. Students used to come on the course, and if there wasn't servers, storage, and networking actually in the classroom, making a truckload of noise and making it incredibly difficult to teach, what we would do is remotely connect to what we called the virtual data center. Yeah? Little did I think back in 2003, 2004 that this term would wind up in something called vCloud Director. But you know what, that virtual data center It was called virtual, but it really wasn't very virtual at all. I'll have to hold my hands up. It was just a remote link through RDP to a bunch of servers that were blank, that people would install ESX to, some storage and some networking. That's all it really was. It wasn't really virtual at all. And students used to moan all the time about the ILO connections and the DRAC connections, because once you're in an RDP session remotely on a DRAC card, boy, do you get keyboard latency like nobody's business. You know, it's really difficult to type into. And sometimes the instructors would complain about it as well, because although it was meant to be reset, ready for the next course, guess what? The next week, very often you found that the LUNs hadn't been cleared up, that there was files left over from the previous course that should have really been got rid of. No disrespect to the lab people, but it really wasn't very virtual. For a virtual data center, it was actually quite physical. And for me, the concept of a virtual data center has been around for a while, but it was only a concept. In terms of execution, it was as wedded to the physical world as any data center. I mean, the only difference is that we didn't have to jump into planes and fly to where the data center was to actually do any of the management. But the term has been around for a while. It's not really new. What's new is the way it's being executed. That's, for me, the big difference. The other thing that I think is important or interesting is the way, as we get more efficient in the way we produce and create virtual machines, we are exposing new bottlenecks in our infrastructure. And I guess it's always been a truism about networking. That's where I think about it, that when you remove a network bottleneck somewhere in your stream and you replace that 10 meg a kit or 100 meg kit with something else, all that does is reveal bottlenecks elsewhere in the system. Yeah? So we're used to hearing about that in networking, but what we don't tend to think about is bottlenecks in the things that we do in processes. And in a way, I think what happened with virtualization is it has exposed inefficiencies in our business that previously were disguised by the provisioning process. So you take away the time it takes to raise a purchase order, get a server to be delivered, get that out of the cardboard box, get it racked up and get an OS on it, take that process away, what you'll start doing is seeing bottlenecks elsewhere in that process. And I used to say this to students back in 2004, 2005, who used to say, oh, this is great. I take a template, click, 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 it gets sys-prepped, it gets powered on, this is going to save me so much time. And I said to them, yeah, it is. It is going to save you so much time, but where will the bottlenecks be if we take the provisioning aspect out of the loop? So I used to ask my students, how long would it take you to get a DNS registration for a server that has to go live on the internet? Yeah? Answers from 5 minutes to 5 days, depending on who the customer is. How long will it take you to get a firewall port opened on this particular interface to allow your application to run? Let's say you wanted to do vSphere management of Virtual Center in one location and you want a native connection with Virtual Center and the vSphere client. How long would it take? Anywhere from 5 minutes to 7 days. What I saw there was such a massive variance in the bottlenecks. A lot of the times, the only reason that the guys could do it in 5 minutes is that they owned that completely, and there wasn't any change management controls, so they could just do it without asking. So my point about the bottlenecks is, if you think virtualization is a kind of endpoint in terms of efficiency, then you're wrong. Yeah? If you're waiting for 100% virtualization to happen with the tools you're currently using, you won't get there. Because the sad reality is the thing that's stopping you getting beyond 60, 70, 80%, 90% is the internal infrastructures that aren't virtual enough, if you like. So the new bottlenecks is something that we've got to look at. What happens if you don't address these bottlenecks? Answers: customers will vote with their feet and will go somewhere else. Now, this particular image that you're seeing circulated online this year in a viral fashion, and when I did a Google for an image, this came up very, very quickly. I just typed in dissatisfied customers and I saw this image. And quite clearly, somebody's been to a diner, they've waited for a certain period of time, and then they've left. Have you ever done that? Have you ever walked in a store and seen the queues in the store be so long, you haven't even considered joining the queue, you've just walked out straight away? Sound familiar? I've done it, you've done it. Now think of your own people who consume the IT infrastructures that you build and maintain on a daily basis. If you don't react to their demands in a quick and efficient way, they're going to go somewhere else. And there's plenty of anecdotal evidence out there that says that a lot of corporates are experiencing situations where their internal business units are taking out their credit cards and they're going to the public cloud, not because they strategically think that's a good place to be, not because it's good for their application and good for the users of that application. It's simply that they're totally frustrated with not getting what they want quickly enough that they're going elsewhere. How many times in your career have you wanted a piece of software, which isn't a huge amount of money, you look at the process it's going to take for you to get approval for that spend, and then you think, why don't I just buy it and spend my own money? How many of you have done that? I've done that, yeah? I've even come across situations where a piece of software was so loathed and detested by the people within the corporate IT that they've actually found and got hold of the software they do want and use it illegally, yeah? While the cat's away, the mice play. When management's not around and they're not watching what you do, these guys whip out bits of software that they, shouldn't really be using because they don't have a license. But it stacks better than the junk that we have already in our environment, so they take their money and they go somewhere else. Somebody taking a picture with an iPad of my slide. Google it, you'll find it. So if you don't react to these bottlenecks, you know what, they're going to go somewhere else. And that means no audit trail, no compliance trail. And the way I kind of imagine this voting with your feet is that you might be able to see within your large organization an iceberg. And at the very top of the iceberg, the bit that's visible, is the bit that you can see people going over their card limits and spending money on a public cloud, yeah, which then triggers, why are we having this level of spend? Below the surface of the water is lots of other virtual machines that might be living out there that you have no idea that they even exist. And you have no idea what software or IP is inside them, yeah? So I see a great symbiotic relationship between customers and end-using computing here at VMware, and also the kind of infrastructure that we do. When people can't share things very easily with external people, what do? They open up a Dropbox. They vote with their feet. They go somewhere else. Now, in some respects, I actually respect those people who jump out of my corporate world and through their own innovation, through their own entrepreneurial spirit, find a solution to their problem, and which makes their life easier. So I don't actually criticize the people doing that, because if it was me, I'd be doing the same thing, because that's the kind of personality I have. I look for solutions to problems and I grab them, yeah? I don't tend to worry too much, does this fit in with all my corporate policies, yeah? My life is too short, the job that I need to complete is in a finite period. If it makes it quicker and faster, I'm gonna go, yeah? What I criticize and what I think we need to do is to try and make that so it happens much less. Facilitate it happening so we do have an audit trail, so they come by me before they go somewhere else. So there is a trail and there is a kind of measure of what's being used. The other thing I think that needs to happen in our industry is a bit of a cultural revolution, a bit of a change in the way we think. You might have noticed it in the words I'm actually using. I said end consumer or consumers. I didn't say end user, yeah? I'm trying to use different words to talk about the people I used to supply services to. Because let's face it, in our industry, the term end user is actually a term of abuse, isn't it? It's often used as an insult, yeah? Oh, the end users, yeah? They don't know the shift key from their elbow, you might say, yeah? I don't think we can carry on thinking that way about the people who keep us in jobs. Because if there's no users, there's no servers, and if there's no servers, there's no need for me, you, or any of the software, yeah? We need to supply that customer attitude in a much more user-friendly way. And I've got two sort of anecdotes about that, one humorous and one serious. The humorous one is this picture of the IT crowd, which I'm sure many of you have heard. The first thing that the guy does whenever he picks up the help desk number is, have you switched it off and switched it back on again, and he puts the phone down, yeah? That, I think, is a great illustration of the way we sometimes regard our end users. That has to change. On a more serious side of things, I've got the hammer and sickle of the Soviet Union. Why? Well, I think personally that the way many customers run their internal IT infrastructures as if it was based around a command control economy, as if we were in not a market, free market capitalist economy, but if we lived in a world of state planning. And I believe personally that the way we finance IT and structure IT is designed in such a way that distorts and alters the way people behave as humans. Yeah? Here's two examples of that. It's the yearly budget round, but you've not spent all your budget. Yeah? So you desperately try and spend as much of it as possible, because if you don't spend all of your budget within a particular period of time, you might have that taken away from you. Yeah? I don't know about you, but I have a bank account. If I don't spend all the money, it's not like my employer takes it back because I didn't spend it all. It's mine, not yours. That's how the private world works. That's how the entrepreneurial works. In fact, it's my reward, isn't it? Yeah, if I get my money and I spend it efficiently and I have spare, that's called savings. That's called investments. Yeah, I don't get penalised for it, but I do in the world of corporate IT. Here's the opposite side of that coin, if you like. I'm pitching for my next 1 year's worth of budget or 2 years worth of budget. Yeah. So what I do is I play that game where I pretend I actually need more money than I really do. Why do I do that? Well, I always know that whatever I ask for, I never get it anyway. So best to add a 10% or 15% or 5% additional to what I want. So when I get offered 5% less than I ask, I actually get what I wanted in the first place. And I sneak away going, hoo, I've got the money I wanted after all for that particular project. It is crazy. And we've been living this way for nearly 20 odd years, or put another way, since I actually started in the world of IT. So I personally think we have to move towards more of a model where IT is financed from a kind of free market kind of ethos. Yeah, that we sell services to the business, they buy those services from them. I must admit that particular vision, though, is not without a downside. So ask yourself this question: why do people like yearly budgets? Why do people like a situation where they have to deceive or pretend or spend money in an effort not to have their budget capped? Answer: because they like to know how much their burden is. The analogy I've often given for this is a bit like mobile phone packages. Do you pay as you go, or do you go on contract? The reason people like contracts is that they know what their spend is going to be every month. There's no hidden surprises at the end of the month. Unless, of course, you go roaming in the US or you go roaming in Europe. Then there are lots of nasty surprises if you download large megabyte files because you're on roaming rates. The analogy doesn't work all the time, by the way. And then there's that other model, which is pay as you go, where you only pay to use what you want. Now, very often those deals can work out cheaper than a contract, but there's a fear factor. If I pay as you go, do I really know what my burden is going to be over a yearly period? So I think it's going to have to be a bit more flexible than perhaps the vision I'm giving you. I'm doing a polemic here, by the way. I'm using pure rhetoric to try and change the way people think. Often when you do polemics and you do rhetoric, you often overstate your argument massively and crudely simplify the true reality. The reality is that I think we're going to have a blend of those approaches. But for me, the big thing is the change in the way we think. They're not end users, they're consumers. I'm selling services, yeah. I'm not trying to meet arbitrary targets. I'm just trying to meet whatever the service demands are, yeah. One thing that often irks me when we talk about cloud and the software-defined data center is this phrase that people say, I don't care. The definition of cloud is I don't care, and this is what these people will say to you. You just consume resources out of the cloud and you don't care or worry about where they come from. Okay, and in a way I can understand that. You know, I don't really care where Dropbox puts my files, I just use them, yeah? From a consumerist perspective, that's true. The trouble I have with this I don't care kind of attitude is, I say, who is it that doesn't care? And people say, well, it's users. Users shouldn't have to care. And I go, I'm sorry, I've never been aware that users ever cared about what I did. Yeah? by and large, they take what I do for granted. They only ever notice what I do when it doesn't work. So if I'm able to deliver 99.999% uptimes, the only time consumers, recognize what I do is in the 0.001% that it doesn't work. Why is the email down? Why can't I get on the internet? Why is the SharePoint not available? I only get them caring when they can't gain access to it. So pretty much they've never cared anyway. So what's new? And then people say, oh, well, it's not the end users, it's IT managers. It's people who manage the infrastructure. They shouldn't have to care. They should just be able to create virtual machines. And I think that's a very curious notion, that an IT manager shouldn't care. That me, who spent 20 years building systems and trying to make them have massive uptimes and great performances, suddenly I now have to not care anymore. It doesn't really seem to be, to me at least, to be my natural disposition. Yeah? So when a manager comes to me and says, so Mike, how is this going to be backed up and how is it going to be recovered? I don't think my answer is going to be, well, I don't care. You know, that's what he pays me to do so. So I think we do care. VMware cares. We care. Somebody has to care about these infrastructures, whether they're public or private, internal or external. Correct due diligence has to be done, whether you have a VM in your own software-defined data center or an external software-defined data center, that they're actually delivering the same quality of experience that you do on a daily basis. Here's the reason why. A lot of people are quite scared of the public cloud, I think. They see it as a threat to their job security. I think the real response to that is, rather than trying to circle the wagons round and round and try and protect what we've got, is see that not as a threat but as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for me to explain to the business what I can do for the business that Amazon don't care about. It's an opportunity for me to explain to the business that I can deliver uptimes, backup, DR plans that won't even be in the mind of some of my external suppliers. So for me, what matters is all the hidden stuff. In a way, I think we've created a rod for our own back. We've sat in the background as infrastructure people, and we've designed systems that never ever fail. And by doing that so wonderfully, people now take it for granted. In fact, that's often been my definition of infrastructure. Infrastructure is anything you take for granted that nobody notices until it fails. It's like your roads, your electricity, your system for moving water around when there's a flood. Nobody notices that infrastructure until it has a catastrophic failure. And in our world, we have to avoid that at all costs, just like governments do. So we do care. I care very passionately. When I hear people say that cloud is about don't caring, it annoys me. I'm sorry, it just does. The other thing I often hear about ideas like cloud and the software-defined data center is people say, it's nothing new. You know, we've been doing this before. Call it co-location, call it hosting. It's, you know, nothing new under the sun. And in a way, I can see what they mean, you know, because a lot of the providers who used to do conventional co-location, conventional hosting, are now in the cloud business. But to be honest with you, it's because they were the ideal people to take it on board, because they've got a business model that's designed about selling that as a product to customers. But here's why I think the software-defined data center in cloud is different. And the analogy I use for it is cars. Yeah? So I've got one car which is a Model T Ford and another car which is a Ferrari. And they're the same, aren't they? The Model T Ford and the car, they're the same, aren't they? Obviously, you know, they've all got wheels, there's an engine, you know, burns the same fuel, there's a driving mechanism, there's some sort of gear. They're the same, aren't they? No, they're not. There's no way you can compare the first ever production car to this like beast, yeah? If every little thing about the car on the right has been made better, more performant, more secure, easier to manufacture, it becomes something else than the original car that was manufactured. So yeah, the design principles, the concepts may be similar, but if everything about it is altered across the board, it's then a different beast. So when somebody says to me, cloud and the software-defined data center, that's nothing new, that's like them telling me that an F1 car is like your Ford Mondeo. No, it isn't. You know, it's not even a car, really. an F1 car, you can't even start it without a team of people stood around it, loving it into life, you know. And you can't drive it as an ordinary person. You know, if you try and drive an F1, you will stall it. It takes years of training in order to, you know, make that work. But I don't want to labour the point too much. This is new. It is different, yeah. But it's still a work in progress, you know. So I don't know where we are in the car. You know, are we in the 60s? Are we in the 70s? The 80s? You know, where we are in this development. But it isn't the same thing that we've done before. So one of the phrases that I really picked up in the first 8 weeks, this is my 9th week of being at VMware, was this phrase, the naked VM. And it's essentially an extension of something I was saying earlier. The virtual machine that we've been designing and creating for the last couple of years is highly virtualized at the compute level, yeah, CPU and memory, yeah. But the VM itself is less virtual at the storage level than might be the case, and less virtual at the network level than we might like. And then if you like, the services that sit around it, intrusion detection, firewall, you know, other security compliance tools, they're not virtual at all. So the idea of the naked VM, just to get it across, is people think the VM is just a virtual machine with an OS in it. That's not the case. In fact, on its own, it's pretty useless. Unless it can connect to your wider infrastructure, and that means interfacing with other aspects of your environment, it's pretty much useless. So let's have a look at how physical the virtual machine is, yeah, if you like that, yeah. Before I do that, I just want to try and make it clear about where we talk about these bottlenecks. So when it used to be creating a physical server, we estimate around $10,000 US, about 10 weeks for a new server to be brought in. A VM, much lower than that, a shorter period of time. The trouble is as you start to add additional functionality and features, the cost of that particular VM goes up, yeah. Why does it go up? Well, it goes up because there's all these other things you want: storage, VLANs, load balancing, firewall, IDS, security, availability. All those boxes have to be ticked as well. So this is the point I was going to make. The virtual machine at the moment is actually quite tied to the physical world. One example of that is networking. Yeah? So I know we talk about the virtual switch, yeah, distributed virtual switch. But let's be honest, it's not really that virtual, is it? The first thing you do when you create a virtual switch is decide whether it should have one physical NIC, two physical NICs, or no physical NICs. In fact, you can't get through the wizard without making that decision. Second thing you do is that virtual switch is probably speaking to a physical switch. And guess where the VLANs are? Not in the virtual world, but down in the physical world. So A, they have to be created, and it's very much a job of making the virtual switch aware of those. So have the ports, physical ports, be enabled for trunking? Yes or no? What are the VLAN IDs? What should I call my port? These are all very physical things, aren't they? It gets worse than that if you want to. What kind of load balancing are you going to do? Are you going to do IP hash? Well, that requires 802.3 link aggregation at the physical switch to be enabled. Is it going to be active and standby? Is it going to be split across two different switches? It's actually a very physical construct, a virtual switch, if you look at it that way. In fact, the only thing that the virtual switch is really virtual to is the virtual machine. Yeah? After that, it's very much a physical construct. Same goes with storage. Now, the slide I've got here is a bit of a mean one, especially to anybody who knows their way around linked clones. But it's somebody drawing a diagram of how a linked clone works, with a parent VM and all the linked clones. The only reason I picked it is I looked at it and I went, my God, this is complicated. But it's the same process, if you like. The VM, when you create it, has to be put on a data store. Great. But that data store is just a label. Somewhere behind it, there is LUNs. All right, okay, so what represents a LUN? A certain set of spindles, a RAID level, yeah? Whether it's going to be auto-tiered if you've got different types of storage. So in fact, the thing that the VM consumes is actually a very physical thing, and the controls over its performance have really got nothing to do with the virtual world at all. So I'll let you into a little bit of a joke. When I was an instructor, I used to get all the guys to come into the course I'd welcome to the course, and I'd say, welcome to the course all about physicalization. This course is going to be more about, as much about the physical world as it is the virtual world. And the students used to sit back, oh, I thought it was on a virtualization course. And I used to say, well, it's not like you've got a data center with no servers in it, and no networks and no storage. You remember that wire cage at the beginning of my presentation? That VM fundamentally has to interface, at the time I started doing VMware, with a very physical world. What we're looking for is an alternative to that, with an abstraction where the network is truly virtualized, so-called software-defined networking, and storage which is truly virtualized. So there is a separation between the metal, the plugs, the disks, and the way that's presented. For me, this particular concept, especially the software-defined storage, again, it isn't new to me. A couple of years ago, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when VMware had a totally different management infrastructure, the thing that people used to talk about back then was virtual appliances. And they had this buzzword called JUICE, just enough operating system, yeah? That everything would be delivered by virtual appliances. And I must admit, back then, a lot of people were like sort of folded their arms and said, yeah, if you say so. But ironically, I think that's the kind of era that we are going into, and one that I've been in for a while. So I think I've been doing software-defined storage for nearly 5 or 6 years, but never called it that. The very first book I wrote on Site Recovery Manager, I had 4 ESX hosts, and I had a Sun storage array, which I bought from a VMware employee called Richard Garsagan. Yeah? All it was a JBOD, no RAID levels, nothing except the primary connection to the disks. Yeah? Each disk was 36 gigs in size. There was no replication. If I wanted a volume bigger than 36 gig, I had to use VMFX extents. Yeah? Horrific. So I look at this SRM thing, and it needs replication, it needs 2 sites. I think, how on earth am I going to even get a lab environment up to even write about this product? Step forward the left-hand VSA, the left-hand virtual storage appliance. Yeah? Within about a week, or less actually, what took a week was getting the licenses and making the connections to left-hand. I had on what was essentially a 1995-96 array, replication happening through 2 virtual appliances as if they were in 2 different sites. And the actual setup of that particular appliance is dead easy. It was actually a VMware product manager at the time, Mone van der Volt, who introduced me to Adam Carter from Left Hand Networks. Without that introduction, I would never have written any of those books. Without virtual appliances, I would never have been empowered to really do anything with DR or anything with Site Recovery Manager. For me, the software-defined data center takes those crumbs, those little tantalizing feelings of what could be done, and says, well, why don't we make that the way we do it all the time? Why does the controller information of the storage have to reside on x86 nodes, essentially running Linux, because that's what most storage appliances are based on, aren't they? Although there are some storage vendors who have based them on Windows, yeah, but there are essentially Linux, a lot of them. Why does that have to reside in the big metal box? Why can't the intelligence or the control of that live in the virtualization layer and the storage just become metal to me? If I want to do firmware updates, or if I want to move my logic of my storage around, it's as portable as a virtual machine. So, last 2 slides. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I'm probably massively overrunning, but there we are. So, vision of the cloud. The way I look at the journey that we're on to the cloud, of which software-defined data center I believe is a part, is a bit like the trip to the moon. Yeah? There was one organization that organized the Apollo 11 and all the other Apollo moon rocket trips, called NASA, but NASA didn't deliver that project on its own. It was a combination of both public and private investment, yeah, from the US government and also private companies that all worked together to make that project work. So I'm not one of those people who thinks that VMware could do it all on its own. Yeah? VMware needs to work very closely, as it has done in the last decade, with its partners. So this software-defined networking, we've got something that does that. It's called vShield. Yeah? But the APIs that allow that to happen aren't closed off, yeah, like some vendors might be, yeah, where their APIs belong to them and they don't share them. Those APIs belong to others. This year's networking partner award winner, whatever you want to call it, is F5, yeah, a very close partner of VMware. Things like VXLAN, yeah, this layering that can be done over your distributed switches, layering over your VLAN so your VMs don't even know what VLAN they're in, is a major project that we're working with Cisco. So there has been some media pundits, won't name any names, who have said, oh, VMware's strategy for the software-defined data center puts it on to a collision course with Cisco, with the EMC. What a load of horse doodah. The reality is all of these different projects are assisted and enabled and empowered by relationships with the partners. You know? It's only people who know nothing about our industry who think VMware is trying to do it all on their own. And that's why I kind of compare what we're up to a bit like a journey to the moon. It's working together as a big team with partners to deliver this, not something that can be done in an isolated bubble. So we're not creating a monolith that rings any bells from 2001, some black box of which nobody knows how it works. I don't care, I just put it in the black box and I hope it works. All of this is open and available to VMware customers and their partners. I'm not creating a monolith that can't be understood. And there are people who will say, well, Mike, this software-defined data center thing it's a bit ambitious, isn't it? Does VMware have any chance of pulling it off? What I say to those people is, there is no point in having an ambition if it's easily achieved. So if your ambition is to get to the shops, buy a load of beer and lie on the couch all day, and you say that's your ambition, it isn't much of a one because it's very, very easily achieved. So the vision thing, if you like, the whole point is that it's out there. I know that we're going to face a lot of challenges because to some degree this first decade of virtualization has been easy, which might surprise some people. Who were the people who decided virtualization was a good thing to do and that they were going to have it? Answer, server guys. And it just so happened that they owned the piece of the stack where that went. So a guy who installed Windows 1 Wing could decide to install ESX to that server the next and create virtual machines. What we're talking about is fanning out virtualization into other areas of the stack. Network, storage, security. Areas that our server guys who helped us with the first phase of virtualization typically don't have any control of. If you think virtualization on compute was political, you ain't seen nothing yet. When I start saying, well, that switch, the intelligence of the switch, well, why don't we push that up into the virtualization layer to the switch guy? Why don't we take the layer that controls storage and put that into this area? In fact, the way I think that we're going to persuade them is not by VMware trying to persuade them, but by the community, by the partners. So in VMworld just a couple of weeks ago, a company did something that I've been praying for and asking for nearly 4 or 5 years. NetApp released a version of their ONTAP software inside a VM. It's always been there. You had to be a VMware NetApp customer to gain access to it, or an instructor or a training course, but they never made it publicly available. I think there might have been this fear that, if we release this appliance, will that not cause us problems with the big boxes with the disks that we put in? But for years, people have been saying that storage isn't really about the tin, haven't they? Everybody says that, storage really isn't about the capacity, it isn't about the tin, it's about the software that allows you to address that storage. Well, you know what, if that's the case, why don't we make it software, and why do we make it coupled to that bit of metal at the end of the day? Why don't we liberate it and put it where it should be, which is in the world of the virtual world? Thank you very much for listening.